next up, we have Louisa, also another interdisciplinary analysis. She is also from UBC, and she will be talking about using deliberative public consultation and economic analysis to some degree to inform allocation policy. Is that a fair description of where we're going?
That's pretty fair. We'll inform along the way. Thanks so much, Tim. And thanks so much for inviting me here today. I just want to begin by acknowledging once again that this event is taking place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I acknowledge myself as an uninvited guest on these lands. So I am just one person representing a small village that it takes to pull off what is called a public deliberation. And I'm going to tell you what that is in a moment. I anticipate many people here have not heard of a public deliberation before. This work was funded by Genome Canada, Genome BC, and CIHR. So we've heard a lot about the supply-demand imbalance, and so this is why we have the sophisticated allocation rules and criteria in place to decide who gets the next available kidney. And for a long time, Canada has been tilted towards sort of the equity lens, with social justice considerations being sort of the paramount, the primary thing to base allocation decisions on. And this public deliberation was trying to gauge how does the public feel about tilting that a little more towards efficiency. So I think we've heard enough about sort of rejection and the idea of why epitope compatibility might be a useful strategy here. The thing I just want to point out here is while there are benefits to using epitope compatibility for allocation decisions, it would change the order that candidates are offered kidneys, and that may also change the waiting time for some people. So some people may get a kidney much faster than under the current system, whereas other people might wait a long time, a really long time. So this is just a schematic to sort of depict the current system versus the new system. So very simplistically, we can imagine today people are like in a long line, and when you've served your time on the waiting list, you get the next available kidney. So you have a fairly good sense of maybe how long roughly you're going to wait, depending on your blood group and where you're living, but you don't have a good sense of whether the kidney you're going to get is a particularly good match for you. Under the new system, the epitope compatibility system, it's kind of reversed. So after considering blood type and clinical factors, which of course are really important to consider, everybody could be sort of imagined to be in a big pool. And when the next available kidney comes up, everybody in the pool is compared against that kidney, and it goes to the person with the best epitope match. So there might be more certainty about getting a longer lasting, better functioning kidney, but you have less certainty over how long you might be waiting. So why would we want to ask the public about this? There are a few really good reasons. So as we know, kidney disease is very common. So even if somebody from the general public doesn't have kidney disease at the moment and maybe doesn't know somebody with kidney disease, unfortunately, they have a good chance of becoming affected in the future. So it's a very pervasive condition. The other reason is organ donation hinges on public trust. So if we change the allocation criteria and the public are not happy about how that's been changed, we lose their trust and organ donation rates can go down. So we need to involve the public, the general public, in decision making in this space. And then the third reason is, as I pointed out with those schematics, there are clear equity efficiency trade-offs of making this change. And that makes it the perfect topic for doing a public deliberation. So a public deliberation is really just a community discussion. It tends to be on substantial and complex problems, usually those with an ethical or moral basis. And we do a public deliberation when we have scientific evidence in favor of some sort of an intervention, like epitope compatibility, and there's an imminent policy decision at hand, but we must also consider people's values before we make that decision. Public deliberations take a lot of time to conduct, so we again do a public deliberation as opposed to a focus group when we really want people to spend the time to understand and consider the issues at hand. Policymakers love it because it gives them a chance to test out a policy decision before it's implemented and maybe they don't get it right. So just very quickly to distinguish a public deliberation from other kinds of qualitative methodologies, because I think people are probably thinking this sounds like a focus group. So the first thing is there's the provision of a lot of background information. So while this is conducted with members of the general public, we spend a lot of time informing them on the topic. So they're an informed public. The deliberation itself is a series of small and large group facilitated discussions with 25 to 30 members, as I say, of the general public, so usually people without the condition of interest. And the public is trying to come up with recommendations or suggestions for policymakers that are voted on democratically. And more important than that, we capture the reasons for those votes and the recommendations themselves. Deliberations take a lot of time. This one took 2 years to plan and a whole lot of people to pull it off. This was conducted a few years ago now, and given it was 2021, we could not meet in person. This was an online public deliberation, and we held 5 two-hour online sessions. The first day was this information day where the public heard from a range of expert speakers. I'll tell you who they were in a moment. Then we had one session devoted to understanding people's hopes and concerns around epitope-based allocation. This is a first attempt to get at people's values. We had 2 deliberation sessions to discuss 2 questions for deliberation, and it wrapped up with a policy panel discussion. So you can see here the perspectives captured by the expert speakers, and the policy panelists were from 3 provincial and 1 national organ donation and allocation organization. Here were our questions for deliberation, which Ruth kindly showed you earlier. So the first one was about fairness. And it's vaguely stated so that we can capture what's fair for people on the wait list now and thinking to the future. The second question's more about governance issues. So what's important to consider when we make these kind of decisions? We've published 2 papers, and the analyses are at 2 different levels. The first is more sort of a methods paper, but it also explains what the recommendations, votes, and reasons underpinning them were. And then we also conducted an in-depth qualitative analysis, and in this case, we chose to focus on participants' values and their guiding principles in the discussions and what drove the recommendations themselves. To recruit, we sent out 35,000 letters, and I'm just thinking, thank goodness it wasn't right now, because those letters would not have reached people. We had a short window of time. We collected expressions of interest with an online survey over 7 to 10 days. We excluded anyone with direct experience or indirect experience of kidney disease, and we ended up consenting 37 people. A few dropped out after consent. Here's where they came from. So they were spread across all 5 regions in Canada, albeit just 1 person in the Northern Territories. I tried to get more, but we just had 1. The asterisks indicate where the people from rural and remote regions were located. So we oversampled in those areas because it was important to make sure we captured those perspectives. This is a snapshot of the participants involved in the deliberations. So there were 32 in total. And what we're trying to do here is select for a range of socio-demographic differences between the participants, because these are a good indicator of different life experiences. So we're pretty happy with the diversity, although the people of European ancestry, it's nearly 3/4, and so that is much larger than the BC population. But again, good spread across age group, educational background. Even though a lot of them were above college education, there's still some diversity there. So about 1/4 just had some university. So I'll just jump into the results. I know we're short on time. So here are the table of recommendations. Again, Ruth showed those to you briefly before. Y column are for the people who voted yes for these recommendations, which are in participants' own words. N is for no, and A is for abstain. So in response to this fairness question, we had 6 recommendations. The first one can be captured as sort of general support for adding this to the current allocation criteria. And you can see that's nearly unanimously supported. The second set of recommendations, so after participants indicated, yes, we think this is a good idea, it was yes, but. So the but was that there needs to be some safeguards and flexibility in the way that this is done. As we tried to get participants to specify what kind of safeguards or what kind of flexibility, what do you mean here? You can see there was division on the specifics. And what they really said to us is, that's up to the experts. In terms of question 2, this governance, we had 3 really solid recommendations that were very well supported. The first 2 are all about implementing some sort of transition and plan before we make the change. And the final recommendation is we shouldn't stop there. We need to continue monitoring and assessing these outcomes. They were very specific, at least every 5 years. We need to communicate these results widely, whether they are successful or not. So I just have time to dive into one of the recommendations and the reasons underpinning it, and I've chosen the first one because it's everything in the kitchen sink. And that's how public deliberations often start out. This is a very, very difficult thing for people to do. We don't normally think in this way. So the first recommendation is epitope compatibility should be added as an additional criterion, so added to the matrix. That's how they see current allocation criteria. So there's an understanding. It's very complex and there's a lot that goes in there. So they don't want to overhaul the system. They felt that there's fairness in the current system. They didn't want to disrupt that. They felt that the current system takes into account people who might be at high risk. They didn't want to disrupt that either. But they did see that there is promise in epitope compatibility, but still some uncertainty around the evidence. So they wanted this to be put in place now because we have the science, therefore we should not disregard it. But they wanted, before they went more strongly, they wanted to see a little bit more evidence. The one abstention abstained because they don't like wait time being considered in the current allocation criteria, and they did not want that to continue. They wanted the health state to be more important. So again, very quickly, I know this is rapid fire. So the in-depth qualitative analysis focused on those 2 domains I mentioned earlier, the values that were important to participants, and these were reflected throughout their discussions. And then operational principles came into effect later on, and they're really the essential ingredients required for acceptable implementation of epitope compatibility. So we coded the data both in terms of deductive and inductive codes. So we used ethical principles in healthcare to initially come up with the values that were present in the transcripts, and there are hundreds of pages of transcripts. And where those codes didn't always apply, sometimes we used open coding and developed codes as it mapped onto the data. So 5 main values drove most of the discussions, but 2 additional values influenced voting and recommendations. So I'll just give you a sample of some of those here and just read out one, which is the protection and mitigation of negative impacts. So this is the imperative. We have an imperative to put in place strategies to protect the vulnerable or guard against possible negative effects. So people held this value in this context. Fairness was interesting, and not surprisingly, it was a recurrent point of discussion. It came up in many different contexts. It was very complex, and it changed over time. And people understood that to be fair is not always to be equal, treat people equal. Sometimes special consideration is required. In the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on the second quote here. These names have been changed. So Jacques said, I think, yes, it's a concern. I mean, I know it's not fair for someone who has an epitope that doesn't match, but life is not fair. I wouldn't want it to be unfair in the sense that, you give kidneys to women and not give them to men, or vice versa, or something like that. But if it's because your epitope causes you your problem, well, it's not fair for those who have kidney problems. No, life is not fair. So a lot going on there. Over time, these values started to get in conflict. The discussions became very complex, and these operational principles were kind of created and brought into the discussion so that they could balance against these values in conflict or allow you to uphold 2 values in conflict. So here's an example. And so, yeah, it isn't fair. I agree. It's not fair for somebody who's been waiting on the list. But I think we're just saying for the most critical patients. And that's why I think it'll be important to figure out the rating system, because you're right, like somebody shouldn't be waiting 15 years, for sure not. But if somebody was in critical, you know, almost about to die, how can we justify, like I know Jane is sitting for 10 years, you know, on dialysis, but Jane is still able to have that transplant eventually. So this person is expressing that they hold the value of ensuring fairness. They also want to protect against negative outcomes, so we need to be flexible. That's the operational principle. We need to be flexible in how we do this. So here were the 4 operational principles that are really the essential ingredients for acceptable implementation. And I'll just switch to here. I'm very short on time. So in general, there was consensus on adding epitope compatibility from this group of participants. So 3 years later, what does that mean? It gave a signal to organ donation and allocation organizations in this country that it's okay to maybe tip that balance a little bit more so towards prioritizing efficiency. And as a result, there is a feasibility study that's about to begin here in BC. Paul Kewen is leading it once again with BC Transplant, and it will be using epitope-based allocation. Participants here told us safeguards and flexibility are needed. And again, that is being implemented in this trial. So there will be, nobody will wait longer than they wait under the current system in this new feasibility trial. They're listening to the results here. Participants also told us they need a plan and a transition period. And again, the feasibility study will transition to this epitope-based allocation. I have no doubt that there will be many publications and presentations to come, and that they will be open access so that participants can have regular monitoring of the outcomes, because again, that's what this group has called for. Lots and lots of people to acknowledge, and I'm just going to leave the slide up for a moment because too many people to go through, but yeah, this was a big piece of work, and lots of people in this room and beyond contributed. So thank you so much.
Excellent stuff. We definitely have questions. Time for questions. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks for this talk. I have actually a couple questions. The first question, did you record the ethnicity of these 30 applicants that participated? And
yeah.
Do they represent minority and majority population?
Yeah.
It might make a difference.
Yeah, so here you can see, so the ancestry variable here, I've just broken it for simplicity here. So those of European ancestry were 72% of the sample. In BC, it's about 60, so it was higher than usual. Amongst the other ancestral backgrounds, there was a mix. We made a real special effort to try and increase this as much as possible. As is always the case in research, you do your best, but the people sometimes your best efforts, it's whoever is available and able to give up the time. But one group that was highly prioritized for us was those of Indigenous background, given the disproportionate incidence of kidney disease there. So we did have 2 people. I would have loved to have had more, but just 2 people from that background.
And thank you. And my second question is did you involve any of the HLA lab director? Because this needs a lot of infrastructure in the labs. Like, for example, I am the director in Saskatchewan, and I cover the whole province. And there is no way that I, by myself, sit overnight, do epitope matching, and try to find a suitable donor. There is a high-resolution typing. There is a lot of infrastructure that the lab requires. So before, it's not like a switch once you decide to go epitope. All labs in Canada will be able. I doubt that. So did you involve any of the lab directors in this survey?
Well, so this study was being conducted as part of this whole Can Prevent project that we've heard about. So in terms of did I involve other labs? No, but this is based at the lab here with Paul's team, and so fortunately, here in BC, we do have the technology, and I am aware that other labs do not. So there is serious setup time that would need to happen, but Paul, I'm sure, is better placed to answer that than me.